Good evening. Welcome to the November 14th presentation of the New York Metro chapter of Informs. My name is Jack Thura. I'm president of the New York chapter. And tonight we bring to you another in our series of webinar presentations. Those of you who have been with us for a long time remember that for many years we had in-person presentations, and since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been having webinars, and this is the next in that series. Just for your information, we have another meeting coming up that we're hoping to have as our first in-person meeting since the pandemic. We're working on that. Stay tuned. Information will come in due time. There are people in attendance who may not know much about Informs. So I'm going to share a screen and just tell you a little bit about us before I introduce our speakers tonight. Informs is the acronym for Institute for Operations Research in the Management Sciences. And some years ago, a consulting firm gave us the tagline, Operations Research, the Science of Better. We also encompass the fields of analytics and management science. The association goes way back many years. In 1995, the two organizations, ORSA, Operations Research Society of America, and TIMSS, the Institute of Management Sciences, merged to form Informs. ORSA was formed in 1952 and TIMSS in 1953. We've been very active serving the operations research and management science and analytic community since then. The association has more than 12,000 members worldwide, and we offer a whole host of services and resources, including publications, 12 scholarly journals on various topics, optimization, transportation, marketing, practice, artificial intelligence, it goes on and on, plus 3 magazines. The association has meetings and conferences throughout the year, both national, regional, and international conferences. To serve members on a more intimate level, we have a variety of communities. Informs has 19 geographical chapters, of which New York Metro chapter is one of them. 35 special interest groups for those who want to get together and meet on specific topics, such as optimization, transportation, manufacturing. Well, there are 35 of them, so simulation, I can go on. We have 5 forum. A forum is a group that is neither geographical nor field specific. It includes a group for like minority issues, one for junior faculty, veterans. They have their own groups. And we also serve students through student chapters at their local universities. In addition to all of that, Informs prizes for excellence in operations research, management science, analytics, awards, and certifications. If you want more, our website is there, informs.org. The New York Metro chapter was established in 1955 and it's been going strong ever since. We serve the greater New York Metro region, and for more than 40 years, we've had monthly in-person meetings with speakers. The chapter serves its members and guests and affiliates who come to our meetings through an opportunity for networking, collaboration on issues, volunteer opportunities, leading to leadership opportunities, and many more. We've been having a webinar presentation since the beginning of 2020 when the pandemic hit. Below are 2 ways to reach our chapter website. And if you have any questions, you can always reach me by email. Next, I would like to introduce our speakers for tonight. We're very fortunate to have speakers presenting a topic called Leading in a Data-Driven World, Developing Quantitative Intuition. There are 3 speakers, however, whoops, I think that I lost it. Only 2 of them are with us tonight. Christopher Frank and American Express is the way traveling. And so tonight you'll have Paul McMillan of Google and Oded Netza with the Columbia Business School. And he's an Amazon scholar at Amazon. Paul is head of Global Strategic Alliances at Google. He is a leader in using technology and innovation to create strategies for businesses. He has launched new high-growth businesses in over 30 countries and has been an industry mentor in the NSF I Corp. He is the co-author of Drinking from the Fire Hose and an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. Sounds like a good book. Oded Netza is the Vice Dean for Research and the Martha J. Sandberg Professor of Business at Columbia Business School. He is also an Amazon scholar and an affiliate of the Columbia University Data Science Institute. Professor Netza is a world-renowned expert in data-driven decision-making. His award-winning research is broadly read and highly cited. He has published dozens of papers in the world's leading marketing and management science journals. I'm also going to give you the bio information on Christopher Frank, who regrettably can't be with us. But since he is a co-author of the presentation as well as the book, Decisions Over Decimals, Christopher Frank is a vice president in the global advertising and brand management team at American Express. He is a senior strategist at the intersection of marketing analytics and commerce, developing superior strategies applied to global markets, working with B2B and B2C products. He is the co-author of Drinking from the Fire Hose and an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. With that, I hand it over to our speakers who will present this evening's presentation called Leading in a Data-Driven World, Developing Quantitative Intuition. Paul, Oded, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Informs, for hosting it. I've been a member of Informs for the last 25 years, so I've been part of Informs for a while now. We want to share with you today. We're super excited to share with you the new book, our new book that came at about the month birthday for our new book. I guess launched October 4th, called Decisions Over Decimals, co-authored with myself, Paul, and Chris Frank that Jack introduced. And the session, the title of the session is actually the origins of the book. We've been teaching actually at Columbia a course with that name over the last 7 years around this notion of leading in a data-driven world, and specifically the set of tools that we call quantitative intuition, or in short, QI, which sounds originally like an oxymoron, combining information with intuition, data with intuition. By the end of the session today, we hope to convince you that not only it's not an oxymoron, not only that data and intuition could be an and as opposed to an or, but actually it's the right way to combine them in order to make better decisions. And this is, again, something that we've been dealing with for a long time before writing the book, and now we have it all eventually in the content of a book. We very much want to keep it informal and interactive, so by all means feel free to write questions as we go on the chat, and we'll address them in real time. We'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A, but by all means feel free to ask your questions as we go. Paul, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. Thanks, Oded. It's interesting when we talk about decisions, and I'll give you a little preamble before I get into what is a decision. What we're going to talk about today is about that balancing act, but you should recognize that among the three authors, we have 2 engineers, 2 data scientists, world-renowned researcher. So we love the numbers. We crave the numbers. But a good decision is about the balance, and that's what the slide depicts. But what really is a decision? A decision represents change, and change is uncomfortable for most people. And when you're confronted with change, what ultimately happens for the majority of people is they retreat to their comfort zones. Some people retreat to more data, so more spreadsheets, and I'll create other spreadsheets from the ones that I have. Oh, you have a spreadsheet? Give me your spreadsheet. Let's create even more. And there's probably not an answer just in minding the spreadsheets. Other people go in the other direction. What they say is, listen, I don't have time, or I'm not inclined to look at all the data, but I have a real sense of what's happening here. So I'm going to go with my instinct. I'm going to go with my intuition, and I'm going to make a choice. And both of these are flawed because a great decision and terrific business leaders tend to bring those two sides together. You see terrific decisions being made when people do not operate based on fear. Those who retreat to one side or the other are afraid of making a mistake. They are afraid that the decision will not be reversible. And so a strong leader and strong teams that leaders build and support do not operate from a presumption of fear of making the wrong choice, but really operate with a balanced sense and looking with a 360 view, a holistic view across data and insights of all forms, including intuition. Oded, do you want to say some more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a reason we call the book Decisions Over Decimals. And the key behind the notion of decisions over decimals is that we want to focus on decisions and guide the data through decisions as opposed to the other way around. The reality of today, and particularly, ironically, the world of big data has created this. The problem is even more severe. Data was supposed to fix things, was supposed to make decisions easier, and yet we find ourselves still spinning. We find ourselves still struggling with making decisions. And that's how we actually landed on this whole notion of quantitative intuition. Was Chris, Paul, and myself through, top 5 companies, Fortune 5 companies, if you will, through teaching at this point thousands of executives and executives to be. We've noticed that big data came with a promise of eventually making perfect decisions, certain decisions, and yet we need to pour judgment into it. And we ask ourselves, what do we need in order to make these better decisions? What do we need in this new world now that the dust has settled, if you will, on a big data, capital B, capital D? What do we need? What type of skills do we need to be able to address this fear where we realize that uncertainty is not going away, that big data would not solve the issue of uncertainty. So, Paul, how do we deal with the change?
Well, and this is the thing. You have to look and see with your teams and with yourself, how do you deal with the change? Are you overwhelmed with the change? Are you in denial? Are you fighting to break through? And the fact is, those that thrive in the ambiguity have a set of tools, have a pattern, have something they can rely on. You know, we talk about data is the new oil. Well, you can't use oil in its raw form. You need a refinery. And, you know, these are quotes from some well-known journalists that I'm borrowing here, but it really is true. You need a refinery, and you need a refinery at your fingertips. And that is a balanced set of tools that gets you past what we see here, where you're overwhelmed or you're in denial and you're getting past the fear.
And a big part of what we talk about is and the tool of quantitative intuition is not just to allow you to live with the it's not just allow you to deal with the uncertainty, but actually accept the fact that eventually you will need still to pour judgment in making these decisions. And the tool that we propose is something that we call quantitative intuition, the new form of intuition, if you will, that we believe is needed in the world in which data did not eliminate the need for intuition, is something that we call quantitative intuition. The ability to make decisions with incomplete information via precision questioning, contextual analysis, and synthesis to see the situation as a whole. So really, there are in this balance, in this striking the right balance, which is the way we call it in the book, striking the right balance between intuition and information, lies three components: being able to ask very precise questions, being able to highlight what is the essential question that we are dealing with, contextualizing the information and the analysis, so making sure that we are looking at the data, but from the context of the business, asking what is the context for every data point that we observe, and finally bringing this all together through synthesis to eventually make an action. These are at the heart of what we talk about, and what we're going to do today is we're going to break each one of these. We're going to open up each one of them and explain not only what they are, but what are the tools that go into each one of them. And you know, if you want an example of what quantitative intuition would look like, imagine sitting in a meeting, slide after slide after slide of tables. I'm sure you've all sat in these meetings, right? And we are slide number 14, and suddenly we hear a voice from the back of the room. Stop. This number doesn't match the number on slide number 7. And we're like, whoa, what did just happen, right? That person did something that most of us don't do. That leader, what she did was she was comparing things not within a slide, but rather in a context, looking across slides and saying, in fact, this doesn't make sense. In fact, it probably started with a number on slide number 14, where she said, something bothers me with this. Something hurts in the stomach. I don't think this number is right. And then she contextualized it, synthesized it across different slides. This is a type of skills that we call quantitative intuition. And it's important to remember, particularly actually in this crowd, in a crowd of informs, where most of us are math whiz in this way or the other, right? Most of us are trained in engineering and numbers. The skill needed to do exactly what she did, which is saying this number doesn't match the number on slide number 7. She didn't solve logarithms in her head, square roots, open a fancy Excel. It's a different skill. It's a skill of looking at the number, comparing it, looking at it in a maybe less traditional way of analyzing the information. So one of the myths that we debunk, if you will, in the book is that to develop this quantitative intuition, you don't need to be top of a class in math. And in fact, when we hire people for these jobs, it doesn't necessarily mean hiring for math skills, hiring for good engineering or even data science skills. It's hiring for asking precise questions, for being able to contextual the analysis or to synthesize. Paul, anything you want to add on that?
Well, just that a couple of things. Number one, decision making is a team sport. And so if you don't have what you may perceive as a fundamental skill, that's okay. Make a friend, buy them coffee, because often the person who may not be the math whiz is the person that has the insight to the business because they are the business line leader and they will have the intuitive sense of what the next step is. Let me give you an example. Folks, is COVID over? What number are you going to point to that says COVID's over? The corollary, do I reopen the offices? Do I keep the offices open the way I normally do through the coming winter? There's not a number that you're going to look for that's going to answer that. Are we in a recession? How do you know? Do I invest in this startup? Do you really know? Most VCs will say that when they invest in a startup, yeah, they did the analysis, they did the due diligence, they looked at the technology stack if there is one, but they invested in the people because they believe those people have the fortitude and the mindset to navigate through problems. There's no number that tells you that. But what those investors are doing is looking at an analytical view and at a gut view and an insights view, right? What does their intuition tell them about a particular startup company? So I just gave you a few other examples here. And this is really speaking to the fact that a terrific business leader understands the fundamentals of their business, which are often quantitative, but they have a feel for their business. And so they understand what feels right, but they don't act on just that. They trust, but they verify, and they keep correlating both sides over and over. So let's jump into it.
Yeah, let's jump into this process of quantitative intuition. And one question that we are sometimes being asked is, can you teach intuition? I mean, we all know that you can teach quantitative skills. We've been taught that from a very young age, and again, probably people on this call have been taught it all the way into graduate school. But can you teach intuition? Can you really teach? Isn't intuition something that is primal? You either have it or don't. The theory of learning suggests that there are 4 stages to learning. At the lowest stage of learning, we are so clueless that we are unconsciously incompetent. We don't even know what we don't know. Then we move into stage 2, where we learn something new. We learn the term quantitative intuition. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but I'm at least aware, I'm conscious about something I'm yet incompetent about, right? And then, you buy the book, you start reading chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and you're becoming consciously competent. I say, I've learned a few tools even. I not only know what quantitative intuition is, but I learn a few tools. At the highest level of learning, the nirvana of learning, if you will, is stage number 4. When you get into the point where things become second nature or habit, when you start doing things without even thinking about them, I reapply these tools over and over again, as Paul, Chris, and I have been doing over the years, and many of our students who have been taking our classes and sitting in our executive education courses, where it becomes totally second nature. This leader who says this number doesn't match the number on slide number 7, we already expect it from her. She does it every single meeting, right? The start, it was hard. It requires thinking. Now it's a second nature or a habit. And that's intuition, right? None of us was born learning how to ride a bike or drive a car. We do it often enough, and it becomes more of an intuitive skill. Moving maybe into the first pillar and thinking about the skills needed, right? Chris, Paul, and I believe that the smartest person in the room is the person who asks really good questions, not necessarily the one that always pick me, I have the right answer, right? It's really more around asking questions that drive the conversation forward. And we have, in fact, chapter number 1 in the book is all around asking powerful questions, learning how to ask powerful questions. And one of these questions is asking people, what do you wish you knew? Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, it sounds deceptively simple, right? But the key to this is the word wish, right? Because most often when a project team starts, you're actually validating what you already think the leadership team has implicitly said. They've already anchored you. or the market's anchored you, or something has anchored you. And the fact is, we hire very talented people, and then we don't let them use their insight and their foresight. So if you say to somebody, what is it you wish you knew? The key word is wish. It'll be an uncomfortable minute or two, maybe even a little longer. And they'll say, no, we need to move forward. Humor me. Tell me what it is that you wish you knew about this situation right now. Suddenly, there is usually a set of questions that come out. I wish I knew this. I wish I knew what my opportunity is with Gen Z. I really wish I knew what my opportunity is with the affluent segment of Gen Z in metropolitan cities. I really wish I knew what my opportunity is with Gen Z in metropolitan cities who live a complex lifestyle and shop online at 10 o'clock at night and expect products the next day via mail because they don't go to stores. Oh, you're actually looking for a very specific thing. If you run that kind of exercise, there's a set of divergent conversations that happen, and then a set of convergent conversations that happen. And the key to this is leaders opening the space, allowing the space for that kind of conversation where you can drill in once you ask, what do you think is really the issue here? Maybe it's an outlier to explore. Maybe there's something out there that is really on top of your mind, but you're going to bury it because that's not the thing that was said that anchored you. As leaders, you should stop doing that and make sure that there's an open conversation. And this question leads to that. Oded, could you say a little bit about working backwards?
Yeah. So the heart of precision questioning and particularly nailing down the essential problem, right? What we found was that many of these data-driven journeys, and if you think about what you do generally when you are approaching a data-driven type of a problem, we tend to jump to a solution mode. We tend to jump to straight into the data and straight into solutions, right? And the problem is we find ourselves spinning. And when we ask actually leaders, we ask, what is the biggest gap in your data-driven journeys? What we heard from leaders, and we asked this at this point to hundreds and hundreds of executives in our programs, we found that there were two things that stand out as biggest gap. And these are not, by the way, in the data or in the analysis. It's not in I don't have number crunchers, I don't have enough data scientists, or I don't have enough data. We don't define the problem and we never convert it into actions. And what the idea behind working backwards is to kill two birds with one stone, is to be able to solve the problem of both action and problem by bringing the action all the way to the start of the problem, which means what you should be asking yourself is, what is the decision at hand? What is the action? What is the decision I need to make? Not what I do, meaning I should be buying this company, but a question, should I be buying this company? It's a decision. It's a buy or no buy. Because if the question is, let's buy this company, don't waste time and money, just go and buy if you're convinced that this is the case. If it's still indeed a decision in your mind, start with that and then ask yourself, what are the I weeks that I would want, that I wish I knew in order to be able to make the decision? So work backwards. What is the decision? What are the I weeks, or what is the blueprint of a report I would want in order to be able to make the decision? Then go and fill in the blanks and make the decision. So it's much more of a guided process for data-driven journeys than the typical process, which is, let's just jump straight in the data and see if there is anything interesting in this data. If you want to kind of think about an example for it, your car dashboard is actually a good example for working backwards. Your car dashboards, unlike, by the way, most of the dashboards that I see at work, is very much action-oriented. Why is it action-oriented? Because almost every single thing on your car dashboard, you should look at it in order to change something you're doing, to act. You're driving too fast, it's going to beep or going to show you that you're driving too fast to slow down. You need to fill in gas. your engine is overheated. You need to stop and add water or check your oil. These are all very action oriented. By the way, unfortunately, in recent years with computers and so on, this dashboard did become a bit more cumbersome, but for the most part, they're very much action oriented. However, the dashboard that we see at work, the dashboard that we produce, are more of spitting out every information the engine is creating. We should strive to have our dashboard at work much more working backwards, action oriented, spitting the information that we really need.
So the key here is open up the conversation. You have brilliant leaders that say, I want to work on first principles. I want to work on what's essential, but there's no path to get there. Taking this process, I wish I knew, gets you to that path. Divergent questions, then converge down to a set of questions, then plot them against what's urgent and important, right? The old Eisenhower matrix, repurposed. And if you focus on what's urgent and important, rather than, well, here's information that we can maintain or information that's irrelevant, where we often spend a lot of time, focus on the urgent and important, and you will move forward. And that is a path towards precision questioning.
Yeah, and you can see that the path that goes, and in fact, the path that goes through our entire and thinking around quantitative intuition is be very purposeful in the way you go on these journeys. Do not do the journey for the sake of the journey or for the sake of data, or sake of I'm doing AI, I'm doing machine learning, I'm spinning by analyzing more and more data.
Yes, and Vasim says, I hope I said that correct, says coming to a consensus on what's urgent and important is the biggest challenge. Spot on. And so going through this process, stakeholders are there at the very inception. So the consensus comes together through this process.
And one of the things that we found was that this sentence, I wish I knew, is one that does allow you to, because of the word wish that Paul mentioned, and because of how inviting it is, it's actually one that does help you go to the highest level in the organization with a welcoming question of what is it that you wish you knew. It's one that can go within a team vertically or even across teams more of hierarchically in the team.
Great. So let's move on to the next branch. Oded.
Yeah, so let's talk about contextual analysis. Paul, you want to?
Sure. So when you see any piece of information, you should put it in some form of context. And the fact is, we often don't. We often take information at face value, and that leads to problems because you're likely going down the wrong path. So there's two things on this slide. The context triangle, where any piece of information should be triangulated across a benchmark, an absolute, and longitudinally over time. Simple example. We sold 12 shovels last month. It's fantastic. And that means we sold 12 shovels in October. Wow, that's an anomaly. Are you going to change your business because of the anomaly? You're going to change your strategy? Or are you going to put that in context and say, well, the real issue is there was an unexpected storm, so 12 shovels were sold. So you just looked at the benchmark. It was 12 more than normal. It was an anomaly. That's the absolute. And over time, the other benchmark, your competitor down the street sold 20. Why are you celebrating? Ridiculous example, I get it. But isn't that what happens all the time? We don't look and say, how does this compare? And is this really driving us forward? We just look at the immediacy of it. And so when you look at investors that are in M&A, for example, they're always looking this way at comparables. Most often there's not an exact match. So they have to triangulate, as you see here. So it's very powerful to make sure that every piece of information you have, you triangulate along these three dimensions, because as we all know, you could torture data into saying anything you want it to say. It will confess to whatever you want it to confess to. But if you put these contextual boundaries around it, you usually expose the truth of what that data is trying to convey to you. The other point on this, and then let's go to Oded for some thoughts on this, is the question, what surprised you? And surprise is pretty important because we come into conversations with some level of bias, and it tends to strip out the bias because you're not talking about, here's what I expected to see, but here's what I did see and what's surprising. So think about going to a party, and when you leave the event with the people that you went with, your conversation is not about, well, the food was nice, the lighting was good. It's usually about something that was truly surprising. The interaction between two people, some unexpected event that happened. And so in our personal lives, we make the space to discuss surprise, but in our business lives, we take the information that's surprising and we put it in the appendix of a deck because it doesn't fit the narrative that we think the boss wanted to hear. This goes back to what we said before on the IWIC, where it's important to create the space in an organization to talk about that outlier, to talk about not every outlier, but with a good sense of the business, you should be able to step forward and say, you know, there is something that was surprising that maybe I don't have an answer for. And even if I put it in context, as you see in the context triangle, I still don't have an answer for. But I think as a group, we should discuss it, and maybe something interesting will come from that. Maybe we will learn something together, and it will be the root of what we see. And Oded, I think you've seen that in your work at Amazon as well.
Yeah, I think that what surprised you is a deceptively simple question and yet super, super powerful. If you think about surprise, what is a surprise? Surprise, by definition, is the merge of information and intuition. You have some priors, you have some intuition, and then you're faced with data, with information. When these two do not match, you get a surprise, right? So by definition, surprise is intuition and information. And it's often the simple question that goes straight to the chase, right? I mean, when at Amazon, when I'm, I work, for example, with a data scientist, and they come with their, with their 2 week of work since the last time we've met, and they're about to drop on me, the entire information of everything that they've done. I said, look, I promise we're going to look at your deck and everything. That at Amazon, it's not deck. It's Amazon is more documents. But I promise we're going to look at the document. But before we go there, I have one question for you. Tell me one or two things that surprised you, and you'll be amazed how fast this cuts straight to the chase of. By the way, two options: either what's super interesting, or very easily find the mistakes in the analysis, because the surprise may be that analyst misses some context that I have, and we can identify exactly where the problem is. And it's a question that moves discussion forward. Now, if you think more about data scientists or statisticians, what do we do with surprises? We call them outliers. We throw them away, put them in the appendix because they don't match the pattern. It is often exactly in these surprises where the interesting insights do lie. So don't dismiss surprises, actually cherish them and use them. And going maybe back to the context and so on, don't confuse also statistical significance with managerial relevance. Something can be statistically significant and managerially totally irrelevant and the other way around. That's to highlight that, right? I mean, what is statistical significance? 0.05, 95% confidence, right? It's being wrong 1 out of 20 times. That's literally what it means, right? Whatever statement you're making statistically, will be wrong 1 out of 20 times. If you think about leaders and business decisions, being wrong 1 out of 20 times, that's beautiful. Being wrong 1 out of 10, not bad. 4 out of 5, right? Being right 4 out of 5 times, still pretty good. I mean, statisticians, their ears are burning with 0.2, right? And yet, for most decisions we are making, this level of certainty is actually pretty good. So the idea of believing that there is a one level of accuracy needed for all decisions, it's totally nonsensical, right? I mean, think about you're sending a shuttle to space, being wrong 1 out of 20 times. That's horrible. You're going to blow this thing up 1 out of 20 times? If I recommend to you movies on Netflix, being wrong, being right 4 out of 5 times or 8 out of 10, I'm a hero, right? On the other hand, if the two I'm wrong, this is a type 1, type 2 errors. If the two I'm wrong, one of them is porn, that's horrible, right? So don't match the level of, or do match the level of decision you're making with the level of accuracy. As statisticians, we are being told that there is this universal level of accuracy, and it comes from, law of large numbers and the normal distribution and so on, and all of that is good. It doesn't mean that it's managerially the level of certainty that you need. So think about the level of accuracy that you need.
Yeah, and one thing that we've talked about, you can go to the next slide. This is fine on the next slide as well. One thing that we've talked about that bridges the prior slide to this is, as I've shared in other forums, I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I'm an engineer by training, and I see them do their math, and sometimes I help them. And suddenly, for both of their grades, there were math problems that required them to make an approximation. And I believe their heads just melted. What do you mean an approximation? What do you mean something that is sort of accurate but not completely precise? And this is because we are drilled, especially those of us that have been out of school for a little while, we are drilled in precision. And the fact is, most decisions do not require precision to the 5th decimal point. Close enough is good enough in a lot of scenarios. And understanding what those scenarios are is really important. You don't want to confuse the two. As Oded said, a space shuttle launch versus Netflix recommendations. But understanding that that is a tool in your toolkit. And that is how business actually move forward, is pretty powerful and pretty important. And that leads to the synthesis and summary, and making sure that, as we say, make your top line your bottom line. Understand what is the essential deduction from all the data, and not just summarizing all the information around and about using that judgment. Oded, you want to chime in here? Yeah.
I mean, on the approximation and guesstimation. And by the way, I've seen the same experience with my kids, and I'm thrilled that schools are going that way, yep. Right? 298 times 31. Do we really need to know the answer, or is it enough to know that it's about 6,000? There are very, very few decisions, unless you're sending a shuttle to space, where you truly need to calculate 928 times 31. In most cases, the answer of 6,000 is good enough, right? In fact, I think when we are providing a spreadsheet with projection for next year, if you are providing these projections with 3 digits after the decimal, you are not only wrong, but you're also misleading, because you give me the sense of wrong precision, right? Clearly, you do not think that you know the projection of next year profitability down to the decimal. In fact, we probably know it up to 10,000 or 100,000. Report the numbers at this level to avoid not only being wrong, but also being misleading about it. I do it all the time when I teach. I take a number from a case. The case says 12,948. I go on the board and I write 15,000. And I wait for one of the students to raise their hand. Professor, no, this is not the number. For the purpose of the decision, we need to make 15,000 and 12,948 is exactly the same thing. With respect to the synthesis, the tendency, particularly of young employees, is to simply tell me what I already see in the table. they repeat the information that is already in front of us. And this doesn't push the conversation forward. What pushes the conversation forward is to pour judgment into the data and say, not only what we are seeing, but moving in towards the so what and the now what. So what does it mean for us? And now what are we going to do about it? And again, you can see the pattern of questions that go through our entire quantitative intuition. The first question, things like I-weeks, going into interrogating data with what surprised you, going into synthesis with what does it mean for us and what are we going to do about it. Make sure that when you are reporting information, when you are reporting your analysis, you start, the first title should not be, segmentation analysis, or I ran this machine learning. That's not a good title for a slide. A good title for the slide is, this is what I found, and then tell me why the machine learning tool that you've used is the one that is help us identifying the finding that you found. Start with the judgment and then the data, as opposed to just reporting out the data.
So the last piece that we wanted to cover is to really understand what are the dimensions of a decision. And looking at this, a decision can be defined by how much time you have to make the decision, whether it's high or low risk, and whether there's high trust or low trust. So what's depicted here is the upper left quadrant of a three-dimensional matrix that maps that out, which I think is on the next slide. Actually, go back, I'm sorry. So when you look at risk and trust, these are critical elements, right? You look at trust. Do you trust the information? Do you trust the people that brought you the information? Did they have an agenda? Do you trust the organization that stands behind those people? And what is their track record? When you look at risk, what is the risk of the situation? The space shuttle launch, as Oded said, the Netflix choice. There's also business risk. If you get it wrong, does your business fall apart? Reputationally, perhaps. And then personal risk, which brings us all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. Do we feel that we're putting ourselves out there? Do we have some fear of getting things wrong? So a leader is probably making a decision looking at numbers, or saying that they're looking at the numbers and the data, but they're also looking at risk and trust and time. And if you look at the broader view of this, which is the next slide, the four quadrants are kind of important to think about. Yep, scroll forward. The bottom left quadrant, where you've got no time, but it's low risk. Have the salad. If you don't have salad, bring me a sandwich. It's fine. Can I borrow your data scientist for an hour? Yeah, sure. For a day. Okay, fine. For a few days. Hold on. What may seem to be an ambivalent choice could become a runaway fairly quickly. So be very careful, but that's one dimension. The bottom right, where there's low risk and a lot of time, this is analysis paralysis, everything from children doing homework through to business groups that just spin and spin. The upper right, where there is a lot of time and high risk, is a committee decision. And that committee decision, sometimes there's a committee formed to decide what the real committee should be. Now you're talking about Parliament or Congress, and you're just not moving forward quickly. And the upper left, this is, as I described before, crisis management. There is no time and there is high risk. So think about that. A fireman and the entire firefighter organization. An emergency room, the military, even a football team when they have to call an audible with just a few seconds left. What do they all have in common? They all work consistently. They have a process and they know how to work in harmony. If you look at an emergency room, if you take a brand new nurse and put her in there, she's going to run that emergency room with doctors and nurses that she doesn't even know because they all have consistent processes. Now, point to me what those processes are in the industries that you work in. Some industries have them, but most don't. And so this is why framing a decision is often difficult, because we don't have norms. So what we're suggesting, in addition to the tools that we talked about up until this point, is that you go into decisions thinking about these three dimensions. How much time do we have? Is this a high or low risk? And what is the trust situation here?
And so we moved from synthesis then into making a decision, right? But it's not enough to make the decision, right? Eventually, we need to compel people to do something, right? And you want to ask yourself, you made a decision, now what? And when you go and actually communicate the information, it's super important to distinguish between why are you doing it? Are you doing it merely to inform, to build some awareness for something? Are you truly trying to change you've already made the decision, but what about the organization, right? Are you trying to compel people to act on something? And the way you will communicate will be very different if you are informing versus if you are compelling. And think about the personas in the room as you are presenting information. Think about people. We have different personas that we talk about in the book. One of them is Billy Numbers, right? The person who would question you on every single cell in your analysis. Be prepared for that person. Make sure that you have a good appendix to deal with Billy Numbers. There is the decision maker in the room, right? The person who has the attention span of a mosquito. You got to get them in the first sentence. That's why you should make your bottom line your top line. You should get them already at the top line of the slide. After that, they don't care about the analysis. If they buy your decision, they'll totally go with you. If they don't, they may listen a little bit longer to try and question whether they agree or not. And we have a persona we call Seymours. These are the people who in every single meeting want only one thing, to see more data, right? And prepare for these and think about your goal. Am I here to inform? Am I here to compel? And how am I going to address these questions that are going to come in the room as you are communicating the information?
Yeah, and I'll just add that recognize that if you are in a role where you need to drive a decision, which almost all of us are in at some point or another, you are a storyteller. And your story has to be compelling. And the quickest way to lose an audience is for them to come to the wrong conversation. People may think they're coming to a conversation like the Blue Row where they are making a decision, and yet it is a discussion where we are still informing and still informing. And the inverse could be true. People may be coming to a meeting not prepared to make a decision because they think it's an informational meeting where we are building awareness, but you're catching them off guard and you're saying, but I need a choice right now. So as the director of your own movie, make sure that you focus on the information that matters, strip away the rest, and prepare the audience, prepare your stakeholders, prepare them in advance with prior meetings, smaller groups, inform them so that when you come to a meeting and you call the question and you seek the consensus, that it is set up and people are aware and they have the information that they need.
So I want to make sure we leave some time for questions and be respectful of your time. This is everything we talked about is in our book, in Decisions Over Decimal. You can find more information in DoD, the book. We've been talking about it in multiple places, including, of course, the New York chapter of New York, of Inform, sorry. None of these places, by the way, is a place of people we know. All of these have caught the attention with the book. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell and Daniel Pink have their next Big Idea Club. They picked our book to be one of the top 10 books in October. The book is featured in their next Big Idea Club list of top books in October. We are super excited. We hope that we have convinced also some of you of the interest and excitement around the notion of quantitative intuition and decisions over decimals, making decisions by combining or striking the balance between intuition and information. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions or thought. Jack?
Yes, thank you very much. That was most interesting. I should have mentioned at the beginning that participants have a question. They should see the Q&A button at the bottom. You can still submit questions. We'll capture them. But I saw one. It looks like it was answered, but I appreciate it if you could say more about it. Marcin Kuhn wrote, coming to a consensus on what's urgent and important is the biggest challenge. You spoke about that, but is there more you can say about that?
Yeah, I think so. Think about just that question of what's urgent and important. That's pretty straightforward, but who even needs to be part of that conversation? So there's an element of right-sizing a decision and right-sizing the group of people that need to be part of a decision. By the way, where does urgent and important come from? President Eisenhower was asked, you ran Europe during the war, you run a country, how do you manage all this? And most presidents will talk about compartmentalization, as most CEOs will. But he said, listen, you can map things and say, what is both urgent and important? And that's what needs to be focused on. And so some of this is very much about, does your organization operate that way? And if they operate that way, and the stakeholders operate that way, then it's likely easier to drive to some consensus because you're all thinking about efficient discussions, efficient conversations. I mean, Oded, that's right at the core of a lot of your experiences at Amazon. You're on mute.
Yes, and I think that one way to think about what important, for example, is something we talk about in the book, where we talk about two-way versus one-way door decisions, right? Ask yourself for every decision you make. It's something that they do at Amazon regularly. Is that decision a one-way door or two-way door? Can we walk back on that decision if you're going to make it? And if it is a one-way door, it is a much more important decision than any two-way door decision, right? And if it is, by the way, a one-way door decision, ask yourself, can I break this one-way door decision into a sequence of two-way door decisions to make it less important, to make it less crucial, less critical, and possibly less urgent? So thinking about, is a decision a one-way door, a two-way door, is a critical way of identifying how important the decision is. Working backward from a decision is another way of identifying what is urgent and what is not. In the sense that by thinking about the decision and then backing the information, you will find the type of eye weeks that tend to be the more important one, the more urgent one for me to make that decision.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll recap what James asked about. Do we give talks at universities? So here's part of the answer. We are all three faculty at Columbia Business School. Oded is the Vice Dean of Research there. So this material is in both an exec MBA program and an exec ed program, which have the title of this exact talk. It's Leading in a Data-Driven World. B7676 is the exec MBA program number. But we are open to speaking in other venues if it makes sense. And you can reach out to us via LinkedIn or via our website, dodthebook.com. And there's a way to access or reach out to us from there as well.
And we definitely do workshops with companies around the topic and around the specific tools like iWeeks and so on. How do companies build this muscle, this set of skills that we call quantitative intuition?
When you spoke during the presentation about approximation and estimation, I couldn't help remembering or thinking, coming from an operations research background of my own, that this is a very common situation confronting operations research professionals. OR, many aspects of OR applications deal with approximation, uncertainty. There's decision analysis, probability models, but one that I like is optimization models, if you're familiar with that. Very often finding the optimal solution to a model is far too costly in terms of resources, or it takes far too much time when management needs a decision on short notice. And so the way OR models work is that they can be stopped at a certain point where there is an acceptable, feasible solution that is workable and that can be implemented into a management decision. So I thought of that right away when you were on that topic.
Yeah, I think related to that, one thing we don't do enough in OR models is asking not only what is the optimal or what even is a satisfactory type of decision, but how flat is the objective function around the optimum. If it is pretty flat, then I am at a situation where a range is the answer as opposed to the optimal. Yeah, I understand that the optimal is slightly above the rest, but if my objective function is pretty flat, let's report the range, because getting to the optimal from anywhere else may be a huge effort, right? So we don't report enough these how steep or flat is the curve around the optimum.
No, Dan, isn't there another consideration that, in fact, in a marketing situation, the market is always changing. So the idea of optimal is a very peculiar one, and the flatter a good solution is, the more likely it is to apply in the conditions in which you apply it.
Correct. And in fact, again, I mean, in the book and in the way I understand why in the academic world of OR we talk about optimal. I don't think optimal decisions exist, right? Because decisions do live in a world of uncertainty. So really what we get is a good decision given the uncertainty, which is not an optimal, right? Again, optimal exists in a very confined way of assumptions for us to even think about the word optimal. There is a question, I guess, around post-decision tracking, right?
Yeah, and Alan, can you come off mute and say more about tracking? Can Alan come off mute? If not, we can discuss tracking.
Yeah, I think that the idea there is what happens when the situation changes, right? And okay, we made the decision, but now what, right? After we've made that decision, good or bad, we need to still monitor, right, what's happening.
Well, and most decisions, we like to say that most decisions are not a moon launch. You have to have that precise moment and light the rocket and it's all set. Most decisions are like sailing. You know the general direction you want to go in, and there's a lot of tacking. So, if you're a sailor, you know that. But you've seen it even if you've never been on a sailboat. You get it intuitively. And the fact is, that's what most decisions are really like. So I think you're always monitoring, and there's always a sense and respond element to what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely a decision does not end with a decision, right? I mean, a decision is a change of course of action. In fact, that's how we started, right? A decision is simply a change. Every change would lead with it to all kinds of expected and unexpected changes because of your change, which means you reevaluate and make additional changes. More generally, I mean, we talk about a book as being more, as a book you refer to, as a book you go back to over and over again, similar to this notion of a decision, right? It's much more of a jazz. It's, we tend in business school, we love showing in general in academia, we love showing these waterfall linear processes, right? I mean, as we know, nothing in life is linear. So you make a decision, then you go back and you need to change courses of action, of course. So, well taken, yeah.
Yeah, very much like jazz. There's a theme. You're sticking with the theme because that is your business strategy, but you'll go back and revisit with new information. So very much, think jazz ensemble. And the other way to think about this is, a Kahneman quote, strong convictions loosely held, right? So you get to a decision and you're locked in and whoa, a new piece of information just came in because you are tracking. You are paying attention to how your business is progressing. And so you'll go back and you say, well, now with this new piece of information, now what is it that I wish I knew? Or now what is it that I need to put in context, as we said before? And again, we're not talking numbers here, but through every step here, you're going to back it up with the analytics, with the numbers that we all love. It's that framework and that mindset that tends to be missing, and you need to tap both sides.
2 more questions just came through.
Always a tussle on what data says and what gut says. I believe there's always some information gaps that one team understands and the others don't that lead to poor decision quality. What are your thoughts? One thought is anonymous. One thought is that this is very much about being the storyteller and bringing others along and building that consensus, right? Your gut says one thing, somebody else's gut says another thing. How do you come together to talk through that? And most often people are positional. And so when you are, and we do go through this in class and quite a bit, what I tell you is I need to recognize just not how I hear it, but how you receive it. And if you're not receiving it the right way because you come at the problem with a different mindset, you're in a different department, you're in a different organization, I need to spend the time to understand how you are receiving that information so I close that gap. Every negotiator does this.
Yeah, and I would maybe add to this that think about the situation that you describe here as another form of surprise. One group said one thing, another one thinks something else. That's an opportunity to dig in deeper, to try and understand what is happening here. Do we really have a disagreement, or maybe we actually identify a piece of information that would help this untangle? I actually see these as opportunities more than a challenge. One of the values of combining data with intuition is that the data, assuming it's true, is the same for everybody to look at. It's factual, again, unless it's fake data. The intuition we have is individual. Each one of us have our intuition, and therefore we should cherish these differences to identify whether maybe my intuition is wrong. Because someone else confronted with the data thought something very different from what I did.
There's an old adage in sales, the sale begins when the customer says no. Because then you're going to get into the details to get them to yes. I hope that was helpful. Anything else on that one? Any other thoughts? John, any thoughts from you?
I'll unmute. No, thanks. It was an extremely interesting talk. I really appreciated it. It's I was really pleased to see how you've organized thoughts that people have had over the years, but you've put it into a very nice framework which can be actually applied in the real world and applied using the amounts of data and all that are available today, which of course is constantly expanding. And I think the fire hose analogy is excellent. So it'll be very useful, and I'm eager to see your book.
That's great. We had one student that started to say, well, it is the universal theory of, and we said, stop, no, don't overpromise. Don't overpromise. But we have tried to think holistically, given all the experiences that Chris and myself and Odette have had through the years. So hopefully there's some good value in here.
Very good.
There must be.
Thank you again so much. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for spending time with us. I would like to just mention something about our next presentation. It hasn't been scheduled yet, but Stephen Yu, who's president of Willow Data Strategy and specializes in marketing analytics, is going to give a presentation on Road to Holistic Personalization, Customer-Centric Approach, and Personas. We're looking to make that an in-person presentation, but for that, the chapter no longer meets at high-end venues because the members don't like it anymore. So we're looking for a donated space, and when we can manage that, we'll schedule it. Otherwise, it'll be a webinar. In any case, stay tuned. We're going to send this information out as soon as we know more. With that, I guess I'd like to thank our attendees for attending. And if anyone has questions you'd like us to send to the speakers, or questions about Informs, the New York chapter, please feel free to contact me. I think you all have my email. I'm not very good with this screen thing, but it's easy enough. It's my last name at AOL.com. And feel free to contact me with any questions. And with that, I guess we can sign off. Yes, unless someone would like to say something. Very good. Well, thank you, Oded, and also Chris.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And Chris was here too. We just didn't see him. Yeah.
Have a good night.
Okay.
Bye. Good night.
Good night to all. Thank you.